We got the good version of Josh Allen on Thursday Night Football, and that makes the Buffalo Bills extremely difficult to beat. And despite a late rally by Baker Mayfield and the Bucs and some very strange plays late in that rally, the Buffalo Bills end up winning their game, getting their season back on track, and we'll talk about that and more on this Friday edition of the PFF NFL podcast. How's it going, Brad?
It's going great. Yeah, you mentioned we got a good Josh Allen. Still think it's interesting down in the red zone, not really willing to run with him, and led to the missed fourth down and some bad rushes from Latavius Murray. So probably even more of a ceiling there for that offense, particularly converting down in the red zone.
Yeah, it's interesting. They were talking a lot on the broadcast about how the narrative in Buffalo had been, we need to run Josh Allen more. Like, why are we not tapping into this incredible skill set that he has? And that it had been a deliberate thing from the offense to try and scale back some of the ask for Josh Allen, and so that he isn't responsible for carrying the entire team. And then even in this game, they ran him a couple of times early, and he got dinged up, and he's getting looked at in the medical tent. And it's like, well, this is the tension, right? Is how much do you tap into these plays versus the risk to your star quarterback, without whom the season is a waste of time, right? Like, if Josh Allen isn't there, forget it. Everybody might as well pack up and go home. But this is part of what makes Josh Allen so difficult to defend. Like, if he is doing that stuff, if he's running the ball, if he's part of the design run game, you don't have good answers for that on defense, but it is rolling the dice every time you do it.
Yeah, and I think the key that you're starting to notice more and more, especially as we've seen them, obviously not yesterday with the loss of Dawson Knox, but, they try to add 12 personnel to their, arsenal. I think they were 31st or 30th or maybe even dead last season in the usage of two tight ends. But teams very quickly have realized they can still just sit in nickel and be fine against the run against this team, even if they do have, a multiple tight end set. So his rushing ability, even just stripping out how good he is at it and everything he adds from a, schematic standpoint, when you have to worry about his legs, maybe keep a spy in for the, opposing linebacker. It's also just, they don't still have any respect on the ground otherwise, and they really can't, force heavier boxes or do different things to get the defense to give them better, more advantageous looks, no matter what they do. So it's almost amplified. Allen's benefit is almost amplified because of that.
Yeah, and so this was a strange game where the score ends up being quite close, but the Buffalo Bills had this well in hand, and even so, Tampa Bay are in that classic situation of, okay, we're 2 scores down, we need to get 2 different touchdown drives to win this thing. They end up getting the first one through a sequence of bizarre plays and extend it, and then they get the 2-point conversion, right? And so now it's just a 6-point game with that 1 touchdown drive needed to win it, and it ends up being decided on a Hail Mary. But my point being, it looked quite close with the final score and the fact that the Bucs had the game and theoretically were 1 play away, right, from winning it. However, it wasn't really that close. Like, the Bills had their way with them on offense, particularly in the first half, and their defense was just crushing Tampa Bay in the second half when they were trying to execute this comeback, and somehow the drive kept getting extended, or penalties or whatever, and we end up with a game that looks reasonably close.
Interesting, because they kept punting and pinning them deep in their own end zone, and it worked a lot of the time. They did multiple inside the 5, and you knew the Buccaneers almost had a safety from Baker Mayfield. I thought he was for sure down on that one throw, and he did get it out before his knee came down. But then you're also sitting there being like, all right, Sean McDermott has now punted, 3 times on 4th and about 3, maybe 4 from across midfield. And I get that you have a lot of faith in your defense to not let this Bucs offense score, or at least not score quickly. But it could have, in hindsight, we could have viewed it as a disaster if Chris Godwin catches that ball. And we're saying, yeah, the Bills could have just put this game away, but instead just played the field position battle, which did, again, work a couple times during the game. Also, though, have you seen a funnier or just weirder drive than a 17-play, 92-yard drive that took 7.5 minutes with 3 fourth-down conversions, and then both the touchdown and the 2-point were like deflected passes? Yeah. I think it was the funniest drive I've ever seen in my entire life.
It was ridiculous. It's the kind of drive that only Baker Mayfield can be the quarterback for. Like, it made no sense. It had a healthy dose of like Baker moxie, which was in that game throughout. It's like it felt like every play was Baker ad-libbing, shrugging his way out of contact, fighting through stuff, getting the ball out. There was one, I can't remember if it was the touchdown drive or like the final drive where he ends up delivering a pass like out of the grasp of Von Miller, who just, whooped the right tackle, got around him. Baker sort of shrugged off the tackle attempt, tried to like jump over Von Miller's like body on the ground, who like caught his ankle from behind, and Baker's like trying to hop his way out of the contact and just fires the ball out to the flat, ends up being a completed pass. I'm like, that's crazy. That shouldn't have been a catch.
Yeah, I think that was either a tight end or Rashad White, who may have gotten like a first down or a decent chunk gain. I think I remember the exact play you're talking about. Yeah, it truly was bizarre. We did see, I think, Baker, he was under pressure a ton. We have it as 18 of his dropbacks. He completed 6 passes and took 4 sacks, and we've kind of been waiting for that regression. His pressure to sack rate was insanely low so far this season, especially compared to his historical averages. But I actually still do think, even though we are, kind of seeing that reverse a little bit, I still do think he has become a better player under pressure for whatever reason. Him and Dave Canales, and Canales, I don't think called the greatest game. I mean, you're running the ball a lot, down 2 scores in the second half. But yeah, for whatever reason, I do think we see a little bit less of that, stupidity, or it's probably the wrong word, but some of the Baker magic that we saw in years past. I think he has kind of turned a corner in that regard, even in a game where he did finally take a handful of sacks, unlike the first 6 games of the year for the Bucs.
But it also, watching the game, like it felt like he had way more sacks than that. Like it felt like every play he's under siege, getting just annihilated in the pocket. And you look at the score, the sort of numbers at the end of it, like, wow, he was actually only sacked that period of time. This felt like a Sam Howell, Daniel Jones type of game where we're going to get like 9 sacks at the end of this thing. And it kind of wasn't. And a lot of that was Baker somehow getting out of a lot of these plays, like the safety or that play we talked about with Von Miller. There was another 4 or 5 of these that maybe should have resulted in sacks and didn't. And that's not to say, every one of them Baker made a positive play out of it, but sometimes there's a positive play in not having the negative play, right? Not the safety not resulting, or the sack for Von Miller not being there, and just getting the ball out of your hands almost regardless of where it ends up.
The thing, right? I mean, we're joking about needing 17 plays in 8 minutes. They basically had a 4-minute offense when they needed to be in a 2-minute offense. But you can pull that off if you don't get yourself in 2nd and 15, 3rd and 15, etc. And they did have some penalties early on in that drive that almost ended it. But yeah, he has avoided some of those negatives. It felt like he could have got, like you said, he could have got sacked 10 times last night, and I think it was only 4 in total. So it's interesting. Like, the offense, obviously we've seen the warts. They just simply cannot run the football, and then it's going to be up and down to where you play a team like Buffalo that kind of sits back in zone and lets you feast underneath, and you don't have the explosives to Mike Evans. Obviously, the touchdown was his 2nd catch of the entire game. Like, I think it's going to be hard for the Bucs to really, move quickly and not do what they did last night. It's tough sledding for that offense right now.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think Baker is still playing pretty well. Like, this is as good as we've seen from Baker Mayfield since, the last good year in Cleveland. And then, obviously, the shoulder injury the following year and the disaster that his career became after that. But this is as close to the good version of Baker Mayfield as we've seen for a while, despite the problems around him. Okay, here's one thing. I've decided it's time. It's starting to annoy me that pass interference simply doesn't count on Hail Marys. Like, when you watch that play, which, by the way, was very catchable at the end, like, that's another play that kind of Baker did well. Like, I thought that play was going to end with him being either under pressure or sacked or hit, and the ball never ending up in the end zone. And then somehow he made the right move back there, found himself space, stepped up and delivered whatever that was, a 50-yard, 55-yard strike, right to where it was supposed to drop. Now, once it drops there, it's chaos, right? It's all bets are off. The quarterback doesn't control that. But getting it there was an achievement for Baker Mayfield in the first place. And it basically ends up dropping like right to Chris Godwin, who has no idea that that's happening because somebody has attempted to tackle him along the way, and he's busy like spinning, trying to locate the ball. But like, when you watch those replays of the Hail Mary and the sort of guy who's reaching the end zone, everybody is just grabbing hold of each other. I'm talking both sides here, which is part of the reason it's not getting called. But like, it's just a free-for-all of pass interference in every direction. And you're like, the rules don't change. Like, it's still illegal to do all of this. Why have we decided that just because it's pass interference in the highest leverage play of the game, we don't want to call it?
Yeah, Kate Otten had two dudes that were just like draped all over him and basically tackled him to the ground. It is interesting. I guess maybe the enforcement is tied to, they always say like each side of the ball is entitled to their space. And on a certain route, if you run into a defender or something like that, say, yeah, well, he's allowed to be there and occupy that territory. You can't just bowl him over. When guys are getting into the end zone, they're both already there, and then the ball gets thrown, is it a matter of like, well, yeah, I mean, they're all standing still because they're trying to just box out,
right,
like getting a rebound for this Hail Mary, but are they allowed to jockey and throw elbows and whatever? But yeah, I mean, you could have called like three different DPIs or OPIs, I guess, on that particular Hail Mary. And like you said, it's like that was a game-deciding throw. But yeah, the funny thing is, if Godwin turns around a half second earlier, I think we're talking about a Buccaneers win. Got to give credit to Todd Bowles. Maybe the last coach I would expect to go for 2 down 8, but maybe someone in that building deserves credit as well. Jackie Davidson or someone who does some research there. Shout out to whoever made that decision go through.
It reminds me a lot of soccer where, when it's like a free kick and the ball's going into the box, like, the laws of contact no longer apply, right? Just because if you did apply them, it would be a penalty, and they don't want to give a penalty. Like, there's a degree to which there is an unwritten rule that if the situation is simply too high leverage, we're just going to disapply the rules. And that's what happens with Hail Marys. It's like, if we get involved in this, the officials determine the outcome of the game effectively, right? It goes from being a Hail Mary, an almost 0% chance of winning, to we're giving you the ball at the 1 with 1 play left to win the game, which is at the minimum like a 50-50 chance to win the game. The officials simply do not want to make that call. And soccer is the same thing, right? In the box, during a free kick, contact happens that anywhere else on the field is an immediate free kick. We're not even talking about it. It's obvious, right? The guy has got 2 arms around him and is wrestling him to the ground. That's a clear and obvious free kick. But it's just before a free kick in the penalty area, and if we call it that, we're giving that team a penalty, and we don't want to do that because that changes the outcome of the game. I understand why, and I do agree with the idea that nobody wants the officials determining the outcome of games. But I feel like we've let it go too far in the other direction where it's prison rules on these plays, and that's not good either.